With the 1956 Interstate Highway Expansion Act, the U.S. began to pave a grid of almost 50,000 miles of interstate highways across the country. Modeled after Germany's Autobahn system, it was designed to help Americans enjoy their private cars and to ease military transit in case of war.
More and more cars will be built, and more cars will be bought, and every one of them will be entitled to room on our roads and highways.
But this $600 billion initiative, which is the largest infrastructure project in U.S. history, did much more. The act, hailed as one of President Eisenhower's greatest achievements, also devastated ecosystems, ravaged parks and historical sites, and destroyed and divided communities, disproportionately affecting lower-income neighborhoods and areas that historically hosted people of color. Now, urban planners and activists are working to rectify the situation, calling for highways to be buried or even torn down in an act of road reparations. And over the last 20 years, tunneling or capping highways has become an increasingly popular solution to reconnect neighborhoods. Exemplifying the catastrophic impact of the Interstate Highway System is Treme, a community north of New Orleans' French Quarter, considered the heart of the city's culture. It's the oldest black neighborhood in the country. And this is where jazz was born, Treme's Congo Square. In the 50s, businesses were thriving, the community was blossoming, and the residents would walk and gather along Claiborne Avenue's tree-lined green space.
Both sides, you had homes and businesses, and people would come into the neutral ground.
But in the 60s, a raised expressway was built right over the community's common space, dividing an affluent neighborhood and bulldozing hundreds of trees in the process.
It was a walkable neighborhood because of all the businesses that lined the neutral ground. When it was the beautiful tree-lined neutral ground, there were beautiful businesses on both sides. And they're gone.
Catalyzed by the construction of I-10, the Treme neighborhood's transformation was emblematic of a nationwide trend. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 literally cemented the idea that cars have priority in the U.S.
Militant call for a grand plan to provide a modern, controlled access highway system for safe, efficient transcontinental travel led to the passage of the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956.
These highways displaced over 1 million people and were eventually used for redlining in American cities. After demolishing buildings to make way for highways, neighborhoods would be divided, creating a physical barrier used for segregation.
Neighborhood becomes less walkable because there's less to walk to because the freeway's there. The familiar and social, cultural, and psychological disruption, right? Because then people move. So the kind of community starts to dissipate, right?
Most of the expressways running through urban areas were diverted through, lower socioeconomic status neighborhoods.
Not only did the Interstate Highway System cause damage to communities and land in the 1950s, but it continues to harm the health and general well-being of the population in the surrounding areas to this day.
So this will affect basically every aspect of your health in terms of quality of life.
In fact, one study found the risk of developing asthma for those living within a mile of a highway is 3.4 times higher than those living 10 or more miles away. And the risk of cancer is 2.9 times higher. The possibility of sudden cardiac death also drastically increases the closer you live to a major road. And this is in large part due to PM 2.5, a fine particulate matter in the air that most often comes from combustion engines.
If you're right against it, it's intense, but the PM 2.5 falls off very quickly. Once you get away from a diesel truck, the wind quickly dissipates it. You're probably not too much different once you're about a half a mile or 3/4 of a mile away from the expressway.
But can concealing roads rectify the decades of harm these highways have caused? Here in North Dallas, where one of the most egregious examples of highway redlining occurred, developers and urban planners are trying. In the 1860s and 1870s following emancipation, a North Dallas community was built by former slaves. The hub allowed its residents to live freely without having to deal with the everyday racism encountered in most cities. The population grew quickly as they built up shops, medical clinics, churches, schools, and the like, and it was ideally located near 2 new train lines, allowing goods and people to move with ease. Freedmantown was undoubtedly the heart of the Dallas African-American population, which grew to around 25,000 in the 1920s. But the prosperous community didn't last. The H&TC Railroad that aided the success of the community was dug up and replaced with Highway 75 in the 40s, dividing Freedmantown and making it near impossible to pass from one side of the community to the other. This led to a linear decline of the population and decimated once strong black-owned businesses. And by the early 60s, 2 additional highways were built, I-35 East and Spur 366, with even more consequences. This construction required the destruction and relocation of more Freedmantown homes, businesses, and churches, and Spur 366 blocked residents from easily accessing downtown Dallas, the economic heart of the area. The story of Freedmantown is all too familiar in the US, but North Dallas has since been partially reconnected. In 2012, 3 blocks of Spur 366 were capped, a process which involves constructing a deck or cover over the existing roadway to create new usable space. In this case, Klyde Warren Park, which connects what is now the Dallas Arts District with other areas in the city. The $110 million green space is complete with a dog park, playgrounds, fountains, and frequent community events.
So I think when you can do that, that's great, because you kind of submerge the cars and you kind of connect the neighborhood back together. Because that's the thing that the freeways do. They tend to just divide, they split.
And recently, more effort has been put into reconnecting communities separated by physical barriers like highways, trying to undo decades of damage caused by the 1956 Highway Act. Biden's infrastructure plan allocated almost $1 billion to a pilot project aimed at the removal, retrofit, mitigation, or replacement of eligible transportation infrastructure facilities that have harmed neighborhoods for decades. The Big Dig was a massive infrastructure project that tunneled 1.5 miles of I-93, a previously raised highway going straight through the center of downtown Boston. While it wasn't the first project of its kind, it was certainly the largest and most expensive, taking about 15 years to complete and costing nearly $25 billion with inflation, making it the second largest infrastructure project in US history after the Interstate Highway System, of course, and it brought the concept of burying roads to the forefront of conversations surrounding the rectification of infrastructure failures from generations past. The project came with many political and financial challenges, and even after it was finally completed, it had a lot of issues, including substantial leaking and a fatal collapse. However, a study by the state found that traffic times on I-93 had been reduced by 62%. Additionally, property values increased and new developments in the area allowed for the creation of tens of thousands of jobs. And in place of the raised highway is Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy Greenway, which has become a popular park and event space in the heart of the city. Now, Kansas City is currently trying to raise the funds for a decking project that would cap a 5-acre trenched portion of I-670. The city is still trying to line up $88 million of funds for the $217 million project, which would create a park connecting the central business district to the Crossroads Arts District. And many other grassroots movements to bury or deck highways are gaining traction. Among them is a movement to cover the Cross Bronx Expressway, which was, of course, created by Robert Moses and was the first highway built in a dense neighborhood in the US. Now, with a $2 million federal grant, New York is doing a feasibility study to weigh the pros and cons of decking portions of the highway, which has caused extreme poverty, health issues, and congestion ever since its construction. More drastic measures have been taken as well, including the removal of highways like in Rochester, New York. In the mid-60s, a highway called the Inner Loop was built circling the most central portion of the city, cutting through and demolishing densely populated areas. But in 2017, a project to revitalize the area was completed. The Inner Loop was destroyed and replaced by a boulevard complete with mixed-use developments and bike lanes.
There's a very straight association between the number of roads you have and the number of cars you have on those roads. Anything to reduce roads in residential traffic areas is going to reduce congestion and reduce the number of drivers. It seems counterintuitive.
Right now, over 40% of American roads are in poor or mediocre condition. So while some might want to invest to repair those roads, others are saying it's the perfect opportunity to tear them down and change the trajectory of infrastructure projects in the US. Whether highways undergo demolition, receive extensive decking, or are subjected to tunneling, there is a prevailing consensus that taking action represents a superior choice to the status quo. While it is a pricey fix, one study found that decking a trenched highway would actually be a cost-effective solution.
It's like any kind of investment. So in this case, we're making an investment in people's health by putting green space over the freeway, and that costs a lot of money, but we're making a lot of money back in terms of reduced medical care and increased property values and things like that. And so very quickly, this investment that we're making starts to pay back in returns.
Within 50 feet of a highway, levels of traffic noise are over 80 decibels, which can cause hearing loss or other adverse health effects with long exposure. But capping or tunneling freeways isolates the noise and surrounding levels can drop drastically.
It can actually reduce the noise levels down to 0 by completely enclosing the expressway in a cement structure. The easiest way to think about it is pieces of the expressway are below grade, meaning they're underground. So you just put a huge chunk of cement on the top of that and filter the air coming out of that, and then you can't hear anything.
And filtering air is extremely important for this process. Without filtration, toxic pollutants on either end of the cap would simply increase and potentially worsen the environment for nearby populations. Today, as a result of 3 major highways passing through the Bronx, there's 23,000 asthma-related emergency room visits annually. That's about 10,000 more than Manhattan, despite having a lower population.
This one is especially bad because it's mostly diesel truck traffic, so a lot of the freight comes through there.
Burying highways also encourages more active forms of transportation like biking and walking, and makes such activities feasible when they previously would be impossible.
You could imagine if you're living near the expressway and you decide like, I want to go for a run every morning and you walk out of your building and the air is polluted and there's a lot of noise. You're just not motivated to do that, and it might not even be a good idea.
Decking and tunneling highways has helped to revitalize communities and improve urban landscapes. Continuing to do so won't undo the legacy of constructing highways without regard for marginalized communities, or heal the scars on the urban fabric of the US. And while Klyde Warren Park in North Dallas was considered a great success, it was far too late to right the wrongs of the past. Freedmantown is only survived by a few homes, Booker T. Washington High School, and a Methodist church. But capping is a step in the right direction, and examples like these show that it is possible to reshape our cities with equity and quality of life in mind.